Hey everyone. So today I thought we would talk about the price of wine. So, what goes into a bottle, what you should be spending on a bottle, retail versus restaurant prices, as well as taking wine from home to a restaurant and kind of what goes into that. So, let's start with what goes into the price of a bottle. So, if you're spending $8 on a bottle of wine. And don't get me wrong, there's some great wines out there for $8, but you really have to search for them. So you think about the corks, right? The cork alone can cost anywhere from 50 cents up to $2, depending on the quality of the cork, how off, like the bulk of the corks that the winemaker is purchasing. And so that is already taking, let's go with the low end, 50 cents. So that's $7.50 left in that bottle. Then you have the labels, the marketing fees, the shipping, the cost of the bottle itself, taxes, the markups from the winemaker to the importer to the distributor to the wherever you're buying it to the shop. So you take all that into account. How much of that $8 do you think is going into the quality of the wine in the bottle? Probably not very much. So when you're shopping for wine, it's really important to think about what you're getting. Where is that money being spent? So if you're spending $8, I would look for the plainest label you can find. No decoration. I would even go for a screw cap because screw caps are a little less expensive. And we'll talk about screw caps in a completely separate video because there's some great wine out there with screw cap tops. But really, really think about what you're spending and what kind of quality you're getting. You also have to think about the things that go into producing the wine itself. They have to buy the ingredients, they've got to buy the yeast, there's the fermentation process, there's the overhead, the labor, the equipment that goes into all that. So, really think about what you're spending on a bottle of wine. So, that leads me to the next thing. What should you be spending on a bottle of wine? So, typically, you get 5 glasses of wine from a bottle. So you think about when you go to a restaurant, what do you spend for a glass of wine? If it's their happy hour, you might be getting a $5 glass, anywhere up to $12 to $15 a glass. If you're willing to spend $15 a glass in a restaurant, you should be multiplying that by 5. And that's what you should be spending on a bottle out in town, right? You're going to get really good quality wine that way, and that's what you're more accustomed to. So think about that. What are you willing to spend on a glass? If it's just $5, fine. Spend $25 on a bottle of wine, and you're going to get really great quality at that price point. So don't be afraid to spend more than that $10. There's great wine at $15. There's great wine at $25. There's stupendous wine even higher. You don't have to break the bank, but think about as the price goes up, where the wine is made, right? So there are certain locations that demand a higher price. So we're talking France and like Burgundy region, in Bordeaux, you're going to spend more money because their wines have established themselves, and so they can demand more money for that wine. Pinot Noirs from Willamette Valley out of Oregon, it's already established as a great producing region. Don't be mistaken, you can get not great wine there, but typically you're going to get a much better quality wine coming out of there. And because that's well known, you're going to spend more per bottle. So think about that. If place matters, if you love Willamette Pinot Noir, you need to be willing to spend a little bit more money on that. The other thing to think about is popularity, right? There's these brands that are super popular that people attach high prices to. Think Caymus, Maomi, wines like that. People are willing to pay for that because they recognize it. So it's no different than shopping for clothes, right? People are willing to pay more for Gucci and Versace and these things because it has this specific label. So when you're spending $100 for a bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon out of Napa, you're paying a lot for the label, not so much the producer. There are some great producers that you can get $25 Cabernets coming out of Napa. So don't be afraid to look, and don't be afraid to buy a wine you're not familiar with. There are plenty of resources out there. You can just look it up on your phone and find out what that winemaker's doing and kind of what the rankings are. So really don't be afraid to try something that you're not familiar with. And don't be afraid to spend $25 on a bottle of wine. $15 to me is kind of the sweet spot. That's, you're going to get a pretty decent quality based on what's going into it, as well as, most bang for your buck. So you never want to overpay for wine just for a label. So with that, let's talk about how wine is priced retail versus restaurant. So a restaurant has a lot more overhead, right? They've got food costs, they have the wine costs, the glassware, the wait staff, the busing staff, the kitchen staff, all of the extra inspections and licensing that goes into a food establishment. Okay, so because their overhead is higher, they are going to charge more per bottle than a retail shop. Okay, so keep that in mind. I'm not dissing on the restaurants. That's just what goes into running their business. So typically, you're going to see anywhere from a 300 to higher end restaurants. You might even see higher percent markup. So when you're going to a restaurant, you need to go in knowing what you're willing to pay for a bottle of wine or a glass of wine, and choose a wine based on that. Look at their wine list online before you go. You gives you time to look it up. You could always talk to the sommelier or the wine manager that's at that establishment, and really find a great wine for a great price. So don't be afraid to ask those questions. Retail, we have a little less overhead, right? We don't have all the glassware, we don't have all the wait staff, we don't have the kitchen staff. The licensing is a little bit different. So retail is typically going to be priced anywhere from 30 to 50%. The larger big box stores can charge a little less because they're getting better prices on the wine, right? The more cases of a wine you buy, the better price you get from that wholesaler. So they can price theirs a little lower. That's why you see Total Wine, pricing their wines a little lower than like a smaller boutique shop or a smaller like liquor store, depending on the state you're in. So take that into account. Don't always assume that the smaller locally owned shops are just trying to rip you off. They're just not getting as good a price as somewhere like Total Wine, which is why a lot of smaller retail shops will try to feature wines that aren't being sold at big box stores or grocery stores. So just keep that in mind and don't hate on the little guy, because that's just the way the money shakes out. So with that, right, you're paying less at a retail shop. So if you didn't know, you can take your own wine into most restaurants. You should always call ahead of time. Not all restaurants allow it, but generally speaking, most restaurants will let you bring in a bottle of your own wine. There is typically what's called a corkage fee. So that can be anywhere from 15, I've seen it as high as $30 depending on, the restaurant. And so just call, find out what it is, and based on what that corkage fee is, that will help you choose the wine you want to take, right? You don't want to take a $15 bottle in and pay a $30 corkage fee. So take into account what the corkage fee is, take into account the price of the bottle, and take that bottle in, pay the corkage fee. So there's some etiquette with this, though, right? You can't just take it in and, the restaurant isn't kind of getting their due. So the etiquette is you can bring the bottle in. Like I said, always call first. And if the bottle's going to need decanting, you should make sure they have a decanter as well. Most places will. So take the bottle in, um, have them open it as soon as you get there. I like to order like a cocktail or something while we allow the wine to open and figure out what we're going to eat. And then you should always offer your server a sample of the wine, right? So a lot of times these servers are working on educating themselves on wine. And if you're bringing a wine in, it's something they don't feature on their list. So you want to give them the opportunity to learn from what you've brought in. Sometimes they'll say no. Sometimes they'll, pour a little bit and taste it at the table. Sometimes they'll take it back to the back and taste it back there. But it's always polite to offer the server a sample so that they can better educate themselves. And, if you know a little bit about that wine, talk to them about it. They love soaking up that information just as much as we do. The other thing is when it comes to tipping. So you should, when it's time to tip, you should tip based on what it would have looked like if you had bought that wine at the restaurant. So keep that in mind tipping. Don't just tip on the corkage fee. Add a little extra in there for your server because they count on those tips to make a living wage. So it's really important to tip based on if you had bought that wine at the restaurant. If you're not into cocktails, I talked about having a cocktail while the wine's opening up. If you're not into cocktails, don't be afraid to order a glass of bubbly or something like that to enjoy while the wine opens up. You don't want to, start drinking your wine and finish it before your meal gets out there. We also like to kind of look at the menu before we go and have an idea of what we're going to enjoy, and then take a wine that's going to pair well with both of our selections. And that's just a really great way to save a little money when you're eating out, to make sure you have a wine that you're going to enjoy, that's going to pair with what you want to enjoy. There's a lot of great wines out there at restaurants. So if you really want to, sample what restaurants have, that's fine too. You just need to understand that what goes into the price of that bottle, and that's what you're going to pay. So if you have any more questions about what you should pay for wine, what the etiquette is for certain things, pricing, I'm happy to answer that. You can send me messages through Instagram or Facebook, and I'll be happy to answer that.